This video is about a tag axle that I built for my small pickup and my custom built camper. One thing I didn't realize when I designed and built the camper was that I couldn't build it with enough weight forward into the bed to get the center of gravity ahead of the axle where it needed to be. And I was determined to build off the back to have a bathroom and a shower. So I went ahead and built it, keeping the weight as far forward as possible, and it just didn't work out. So what I ended up with was a truck that could handle the weight, but it centered it over the axle, or actually just behind the axle, and the balance was terrible. When you'd hit bumps in the road, it would kind of lurch forward and back, and sort of around the axis of the rear axle. The front end was actually getting lighter by about 100 pounds, and all of the camper weight was on the rear axle, which is not a great situation. So I realized that I either needed to get a different truck, move the axle back, or then it hit me, I could build a tag axle. But I couldn't find any information on the internet about anything that was really helpful. I found one small tag axle. It looked like it was a good idea, and everything else was big trucks. So here I am, with a fresh sheet of paper, designing this thing. I've got it up and working, and I'll admit it works great. I used a 2,000-pound Dexter axle with electric brakes, and I used leaf springs. I didn't use air to push it down, because what I do is I load it in, then I set the camper on it, and that preloads it. So with this load spread out over a rearward axle, that actually moves the center of support rearward, which is the same as having the axle moved rearward. This gets the center of gravity well ahead of the center of support. It spreads out the load, takes some load off of the drive axle, spreads it to another axle, which makes even loading. It crosses bumps better, and it puts a couple 100 pounds on the front axle instead of taking weight off. It gets rid of almost all that porpoising. It controls body roll side to side by adding one more axle to give more stability, and it adds a electric brake through the use of an electric brake controller, which I didn't have a problem with braking, but it doesn't hurt to have a little extra, especially when you get back in the mountains. So now what I have is equal pressure on both rear axles, a little extra pressure on the front, a nice even stable loading, and the way that works is the tag axle is kind of pushing up on that fulcrum. Remember I said that the weight was sort of pivoting around the rear axle? Well, now it's pushing up behind the rear axle, and it transfers it over to the front, as you can see in this diagram. So now I have a tag axle that can be installed just before I install the camper, and it can be removed. It's not a permanent welded on or bolted on part. So next we'll get into the meat of that and how that tag axle actually works, and I'll show you a little bit about it. Now you've seen why I need the tag axle if you watch the first part of the video. And here is the structure. It's currently pinned in with hitch pins that go through pieces that are welded to the frame. It's tied up just to make sure those rings don't get down around the tire. I'm probably going to replace that with a bolt and a nut, because there's some space between there just to help it line up, and when I make a real sharp turn, I'll hear it shift one side to the other, and I think I'll just put bolts and nuts on there and pull that space out of there so I don't hear that shifting. It's pretty harmless, but I don't like it. Alright, so there it is, pinned on both sides. And then in back here we have tractor links, which are good to pull and push, as opposed to a turnbuckle, which is only good for pulling. And here you have one in vertical, and you have one side to side, and this acts as kind of a track bar and keeps the rear part of it from shifting side to side. So there you have it. I'm going to show you how easily it removes. Since it's already installed, I'm not going to show you installing it though. So here we go. Oh, one more thing. I've got electric brakes on this, and you see this 7-pin flat connector hanging down. That plugs into my harness, which is up under here. Alright, so I plug that in, and it's wired into, it has the 2 wires coming out that go to the brakes, wired in along the axle, and then this plugs into the connector on the camper. As you can see here, when I built the camper, I decided to use the 7-pin trailer connector for it. And then I have another pass-through with a 4-pin that I can use for a motorcycle trailer, a boat, whatever I tow behind it. I did that instead of the usual plug up in the front of the bed, just because that's what I had available. So it's a little different setup, but this cable acts as a pass-through. I can plug the camper directly into the truck, or I can plug the tag axle in and then plug into the tag axle. And the only thing I have left to do is to make a mounting plate for that, so it's nice and neat. Here you go. We're going to remove it. Sometimes I need to lift up or down a little bit. No, I'm not getting in a rush. I'm using lynch pins instead of hairpin clips or cotters because these I feel are a lot more secure. They've got that spring tension that holds them in place. But that's it, it's out. I can roll it back, store it underneath the camper. That'll keep the rain off the brakes and keep it from rusting. To put it back in, I have to kind of center up, duck underneath of the springs, come up in place, get it close. I go around to each side, pin the front, put the links on, connect it, and that's it. So it's fairly straightforward. I'll gather up these parts and put them in a box, and I'm done.